Shadow Complex Remastered is a game that came out 10 years ago and later saw a remaster come out several years later. How does it look now? Well, let's get right into it. This is Shadow Complex Remastered, everybody. So as mentioned before, Shadow Complex originally came out 10 years ago, and the remaster obviously came out several years after that. And with that being said, the major changes with the remaster are actually mainly just graphics based, like resolution, bit rate, any real technical stuff that you can think of. I mean, if you're a tech geek, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about here, but the point is it's really just major technical stuff which has been improved, and you definitely see the improvements. Like, the graphics have definitely looked better here. Not that they looked bad per se when the game originally came out, but they definitely look better here, so that's good. Now, the type of game this is actually a Metroidvania type game, which is a subgenre where essentially it's 2.5 dimensional and you go from screen to screen, essentially just picking up collectibles, taking down enemies, and doing all the fun stuff that you would in those types of games beforehand. This game actually does a very interesting take on the genre in general because of the setting of the game and the equipment that you get. I mean, obviously, just like Metroid, there are obviously weapons like, guns / or in that game, blasters. But in this, it's kind of like a more modern-ish setting, whereas Metroid, it's a little bit more futuristic, and Castlevania, it's like a little bit older. So having it more modern actually does make it more appealing in that sense. Let's now talk about the game menus really quickly. So the game obviously has your stereotypical menus that you'd come to expect, like, the options setting where you can tune audio and enable subtitles and all that fun stuff. There's obviously the single player mode and the tutorial mode. Now, the tutorial mode, I'm actually going to talk about a good amount because the tutorial mode in this game is probably one of the best tutorial modes I've seen in games, where it literally introduces you to every aspect of like combat, of equipment, of anything you can think of in the game that you may or may not need, let's just say. It's there for you, and it's very useful, and arguably you could even go through the entire tutorial before playing the game and it'd feel like you'd be speed running it. That's how good the tutorial is in this game. One very good thing actually that this game does better over a good amount of games in general is if you go to the settings and go to controller schemes, it actually gives you a literal side-by-side comparison on if you're playing this game with the keyboard and mouse or if you're playing it with the controller. The controller they use is obviously the Xbox controller because, again, released on Xbox 360 originally. That's a very minor touch, but a very, very useful touch. So I gotta give them props for that. So now let's move on to the story mode of Shadow Complex Remastered. And the story mode, well, as a little disclaimer, I'm going to be talking about the story mode in a spoiler-free mode because there actually is a good amount to the story, as I am going to discuss a little bit right now. So after the initial prologue to the story, we then cut to Jason and his new girlfriend Claire, who are in the Olympic Mountains, which is obviously a real location, and they basically are gonna go hide out and go exploring in some caverns and whatnot. But however, during this, Claire loses basically her sense of direction, and Jason then sets out to find her, and they find this big cavern complex where something big is going on. The complex, of course, has a lot of high-tech gear with some very, mean-looking soldiers, let's just say, and now it's up to Jason and Claire to figure out what is going on here and what is truly behind the scenes of this gigantic cavern. Again, a basic story, but during the course of the plot, there are some interesting twists and turns that happen, which definitely, if it's your first time playing, it'll definitely throw you off guard a little bit. It's one of those interesting stories where they take a very simple premise, something that's been done many, many times throughout films, games, books, and they do something with it. They do something different, which is very much appreciated. Another thing that the game does really well is actually the story endings. Yes, that's right, there are multiple endings to the game. Well, there's only two, but the thing is despite there only being two endings, it does provide that little bit of extra choice that you get throughout the game, which is very much appreciated. Kind of puts more things into perspective, and also gives the player, which would be you, the option of, well, basically trying to be good or be bad. And I gotta say, the alternate ending, which is non-canon by the way, that you can get is very, very dark. And if you get that ending, well, more power to you, basically, is all I gotta say. But yeah, like I said, having 2 endings, very much appreciated and very cool to see. Now, the story is only about 3.5 hours at most, but despite it having a quote-unquote short length, bear in mind that, again, this is a very simplistic game, basically. And for it only being 3.5 hours, that's still a good enough amount of time to give it a nice try and give it a go, because the plot is still very much engaging to continue playing and whatnot, which is very cool. So those 3.5 hours won't really feel like that. They'll feel longer almost. Before we get to the big thing, which is the gameplay, let us quickly take a little left turn to the soundtrack. The soundtrack of Shadow Complex Remastered is pretty okay. Nothing super memorable, but you know what? For the type of game it is, it's a little bit expected that the soundtrack might not be the most memorable thing in the world. I mean, this isn't, a AAA game or anything. So, with that being said, the soundtrack for the game is pretty okay. It's alright, like, it's not, anything super crazy, but at the end of the day, it's not to be expected that's going to be, a big, glorious, like, soundtrack. But then again, for what it is, it's pretty good. And now we're going to be heading into the gameplay side of Shadow Complex Remastered, where there is a lot to delve into, lots of cool things that you can pull off, lots of stunts, lots of shooting for some reason, lots of grenade launching, and much more. Here is the gameplay side of Shadow Complex Remastered. Of course, you have your traditional movements of moving left and right, but you can also jump up and then dive down in certain areas. And, well, with one of the upgrades that you can get, and this isn't even like a spoiler at all, but yes, you do get a friggin' jetpack, which the awesome thing with the jetpack actually, and this ties in earlier with the tutorial, you can actually go to the tutorial for the jetpack and do that first, so you get a hang of the jetpack. Again, very underrated feature, but it goes to show you that the tutorial really does help out in the game. And of course, the jetpack is a very helpful item that you can use in the game whenever reaching higher objects or higher ledges, or just avoiding boss fight attacks, which those are also semi-common as well. Especially when we have a friggin' like mechanical robot attacking you, but we'll get to that in a minute. Another big equipment piece that you can get with the jetpack is actually the body armor, and the body armor you get throughout the game as you go. And there's obviously a tutorial for that, as previously mentioned with the jetpack. But the body armor is awesome because you can run down enemies through a friggin', like if you have a big hallway, you can literally run, and then as you're running, you speed up, and then you can mow down enemies that way. Or you can melee enemies that you wouldn't be able to melee previously before, like with the big guy with the friggin' minigun. You can actually melee him once you have the body armor. Again, a very subtle thing, which is awesome to see because it adds that, if you want to melee everything, now you can. You don't have to worry about, oh, I can melee the little guys, but I can't melee the big guy with the minigun. No, you can melee the big guy once you have the armor, but once again, only with the armor. In fact, one thing which I really like about the game is the running and gunning, which is basically the standard typical of these kind of games, but the running and gunning actually feels pretty smooth here in that you can obviously shoot down enemies, but also melee enemies. In fact, stealth is a very nice little thing in this game in that whenever you enter a room, under most circumstances that is, when you enter a room, you can obviously crouch and stay as stealthy as possible, but then eventually you're going to have to fight enemies. Like, it's very tough to go from room to room without fighting any sort of enemy or being detected at all. This isn't, Metal Gear Solid or anything. But with that being said, the stealth in this game is pretty sweet in that you can get the surprise on them, and you can literally, it does feel like the kind of game where you can basically clear out a room of enemies within like 5 seconds if you're skilled enough. A very nice little thing that you can do in the game is basically that. And the guns in the game also are really cool in that they feel pretty smooth in that sense. And with that in mind, let's actually talk about the guns in the game very quickly. You start off with the pistol in the game, and the pistol is actually very cool in that it's not a traditional pistol in the sense of, oh, it's like the worst weapon. It kind of is the worst weapon in the game, but not worst as in, oh, it absolutely is terrible. No, it's just the worst in that, it doesn't fire that much, hence being a pistol. It's a one-round burst. But the thing is the pistol is actually, I would argue, a little bit better in this game than it would be in most games, where it actually has a tiny bit more firepower to it than it would normally. And then, of course, you upgrade to the SMG eventually, and then the assault rifle as well. And the SMG is really where things start to take off. The SMG is what you'd expect. Higher rate of fire, and of course, more power to it. And the assault rifle is, in my opinion, the best weapon in the game, in that it has a very nice mix of its firepower, rate of fire, and its clip size, which, again, very nice and very convenient to use. And you also get it kind of early-ish, but not really as well because of the length of the game. So that's basically the weapons right there. The weapons in the game are surprisingly all very nice to use, very nice to handle, and they feel very powerful in their own respective ways. Also, yes, don't worry guys, I did remember that there was a shotgun, and in my opinion the shotgun is okay. It's just, not really one for me in this type of game, but if you like shotguns, there is a shotgun in the game, so there's that. Alongside the primary weapons of the game come the secondary weapons as well, or better yet, attachments. The secondary weapons are also essential for beating the game because of their uses, because of getting from point A to point B, or for beating boss fights, or for clearing out rooms of enemies much easier. The secondary weapons, as you can tell, are very important. And without further ado, let us get into the secondary weapons of the game. So the secondary items / weapons that you get through the game are the grenades, the missile launcher, the foam weapon, the hook, and also finally the leg piece for the armor, which lets you do the hyperspeed / light speed. Basically, it's the thing which I mentioned earlier where you can run through and just bulldoze enemies and even like light boxes and stuff like that. But I wanted to give special attention to the missile launcher, grenades, and the foam because these are the big ones that are used to get through the game basically. So the thing is with the secondary items is they are used to get through the game and to even take out bosses in some cases, but the other major thing is actually for exploring, where you'll come across some certain areas that can only be accessed by using grenades or rocket launchers to take out boxes and doors and whatnot. And the awesome thing with that is if you use the flashlight on those particular areas, you can actually see what color coded they are, so then you'll know which item to use. Like the grenade is color coded green, and if the door or if the box is color coded green, you know to use the grenade to get through it basically. A little thing like that makes the secondary items much more useful and also easy to use as well in a game where, to be honest, you need to know how to get through to the next area, otherwise you're very much stuck. And speaking of getting stuck, this game obviously is a exploring type of game through the complex, and the complex itself is not really that bad to go through. There are several parts which can be a little bit confusing at times, but if you press the tab button or the map button on the controller, whichever one it might be, I would think it's maybe the start button ? But if you check the map, it usually tells you where to go next. There are a few points which you might get a little stuck, but usually moving around in the same area, you will find your way. But the complex in general, the movement of getting through the complex is not really that bad. There isn't really any parts where you can really say, oh, this part is terrible because I don't know where to go next. I mean, it can be a tiny bit tough at times, but the complex isn't really that bad to get through, which is good. Through the complex, there is obviously the other side of the gameplay, which is the item collecting. Throughout the game, you're going to collect items which increase your health, or increase items like max grenade usage at one time, or max grenades or max rockets that you can equip at a certain time and whatnot. And that's a very Metroid-esque thing to do, where you get additional rockets or additional grenades. But collecting all of them is the real challenge. Can you do the real challenge, which is collecting all of them? To be honest, I can't because it's going to take me like forever, but that's where the replayability comes in. And also with the game's new Game Plus option, you can do that and keep all your collected items and try and search for like the 5 or 6 missing ones that you didn't get in your very first playthrough. Again, item collecting throughout the complex is a big thing. This game actually uses the environment very well for its item collecting because it's not just, literally walk from the hallway to get the item. No, you actually can go through secret areas, to like different passages, or through like tunnels, or like through above areas that normally you wouldn't think to go to, let's just say. Little stuff like that you can do in the game in order to collect the items, which again, items will contribute to helping out in the game. Also, the health upgrade, very useful as you can imagine. One minor thing I actually want to give some praise for in Shadow Complex is actually the saving. The saving is technically automatic. You don't have to go to a menu this time, but the saving in the game is cool because you enter a room and then the notification comes up. It's basically like auto-saving, but just a little bit different in a weird way. But one thing I did want to say about the saving is you will hear the same noise whenever you go to a room and get the notification pop-up that the game is being saved. You will hear the same noise over and over and over again. Still though, the saving's pretty good. In fact, to add on to that, the funny thing is the game doesn't really seem like it takes that long to load or even save at all. It's almost instant actually, which is very nice to see in a game like this. With that being said, that is essentially all of the major stuff that I want to talk about in the gameplay side of things for Shadow Complex Remastered. So for a game that came out on the Xbox Live Arcade over 10 years ago, this is a nice little gem to try out because of the gameplay, because of the mechanics, and also because of the story, while also having a fantastic tutorial to just jump right into. And in general, the game is very easy to jump right into. It's very nice, and it also has some very good difficulty settings as well if you've played through the game a few times and really want to challenge yourself and whatnot. For this being my first experience into the Metroidvania series of games, this really took me by surprise. This has been an excellent game to go through, and I'm very glad that I went through the game. Being able to show off this game, and more importantly, this genre, which I never even paid attention to much before, has honestly been a treat to do. Just wanted to say thank you guys all so much for watching the video. This was actually supposed to come out a few weeks back, but then I got sick and then some other stuff happened. But the good news is I am better now, so that's pretty good. But anyway, this has been Shadow Complex Remastered, everybody. If you guys like the video, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell notification to get notifications on when new videos come out, and follow them socials on screen. I'll see you guys on the next video. Take care, everybody.